Hello there, John Coturillo here, the life coach of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Today I'm going to be exploring the question of whether giving advice is always helpful. Now, as per usual, I will make clear that what you see on the internet is not advice, so if you do have concerns of any description, please build a rapport with an appropriate professional. Now, there's a stereotype of a situation that often occurs in marriages in which a wife approaches her husband with a particular problem and she's perhaps in distress or at least emotionally heightened, and she's telling her husband about what's bothering her, and her husband responds immediately with relatively simplistic advice and the wife doesn't take it very well. And the stereotype is that when men reflect on this, they often quip, "My wife obviously didn't want to solve the problem, she just wanted to be heard." And then they'll ask an overly simplistic question like, what's the problem with being logical? I was just giving logical advice. Now, again, I don't want to make this about the sexes because a person of any sex can potentially experience this fallacy. So what I'm highlighting here is that there is a misconception that advice is always helpful. Now, in most non-emotional situations or situations that are relatively simple, advice is incredibly helpful. For example, if you see somebody's car tyres look worn and you advise them to go get them checked by a mechanic, that's helpful because the question of whether you need tyres in good condition in order to drive safely is unambiguous. It's obviously yes. It's the same if someone asks the question of what's the best brand of walking shoe that I can purchase for less than $200. Those situations are relatively simple compared to a lot of the other situations that we address in life, and these are situations in which a personal opinion given directly can be quite helpful. But when a situation is complex, even if it seems simple to someone else, when it's complex for the individual experiencing it, the mind doesn't tend to cope as well with direct advice. And the reason for that is that when a situation is complex and a person's emotions are heightened, emotions affect executive functioning. Now, as I've discussed before, executive functioning is the mind's ability to absorb information, process it, retrieve information from memory, and then use all this information and the processing to formulate a decision about how to behave in response to a particular situation. That functioning can be affected by a number of different factors, and emotions that are heightened are one of them. So when a person's emotionally heightened, their executive functioning may be affected, and a problem that may even objectively have a relatively simple solution may be difficult for them to solve individually because their emotions are affecting their ability to analyze the information and also analyze the value that they assign to the different options, because in that situation a person is essentially trying to undertake a cost-benefit analysis at some level. They have a number of options of how they could respond to a particular situation and they're trying to choose from those options. So trying to choose from those options while holding that emotional burden, as well as dealing with the anxiety of ambiguity, that is to say, feeling anxious because any of those options could have an uncertain outcome, and that uncertainty is most likely adding to the anxiety, it further affects your ability to make the judgment. So making a decision in that circumstance when you're the person experiencing those emotions is not necessarily going to be easy. And so if somebody gives you quick advice, it may be difficult for you to comprehend how it fits in the situation, how you're meant to apply it. For the person who's giving the advice, it may seem relatively simple and they may perceive that there aren't so many risks to the solution that they're proposing, but when you're affected by the anxiety or the emotions in that situation, you may have some distorted perception of what the likely outcome of the solution is going to be, or what the costs and benefits are to each particular option. So if somebody tries to give you simplistic advice, it'll most likely worsen the emotional state because you're going to feel ignored. You're going to feel this person doesn't understand my struggle in this moment. They're just trying to give a quick solution, or they're just trying to sound nice. This is the reason why in psychotherapy or other helping professions, the professional uses empathic listening techniques and other therapeutic techniques to help the client synthesize their own advice. This seems like something of a trope in culture. Many people assume that counselling is a relatively passive endeavour in which the counsellor is just listening and repeating back what the person says. When it's done well, that's actually not true at all. When a counsellor listens and then responds to a client empathically, they're actually very deliberately processing what the client has said and then understanding not just the literal meaning of what they said, but some of the underlying meaning as well. For example, the emotions or the thoughts or the experiences that could be indicated by that, or the workings of their mind that could be indicated by what they're saying. And then the way they respond, when done well, helps the client to actually advance their understanding of their own functioning, because it gives them perspectives that they hadn't previously considered and probably weren't able to consider up to that point, because the mind is only able to process so much information at once and see it from a particular perspective unless information from another source is introduced. And by being exposed to those new perspectives and learning more about what's happening underneath the surface of their functioning, the client learns to develop their own solutions. At the same time, there's actually a neurological effect. When we experience empathy, the mechanisms of our brain that are necessary for complex problem solving become easier to activate. At the same time, the mechanisms that are necessary to help us feel calm and cope with distressing emotions, which, if you're discussing a serious problem with someone, the likelihood is you will feel some distress, they become active as well, so that when you're working through that problem, you're able to self-regulate and think more clearly. So regardless of whether or not you understand somebody else's feelings, learning to practice empathy when we're helping somebody who's emotional, whether it's a friend, a member of our family, a partner, or otherwise, it's essential for fostering quality relations, because whether we like it or not, the mind is an emotional machine and it works on emotions. It's heavily influenced by them, and that's part of the miracle of being human. Although it's not necessarily always ideal and that it can cause us problems at times, it's still part of the quality of being human, and we have to respect that nature made us that way. So the best way to help someone sometimes, whether you have a solution or not, is to help them feel supported, because when you help them feel supported, their brain is actually shifting into a state that allows them to think more clearly and choose options more easily from the possible ones that they have. So thank you for joining me for this episode. As always, if you have concerns of any variety, please consult a professional for help. If you have anything to add to the discussion on giving advice or on any topic, or if there's a topic you'd like to hear discussed, please contact me. I'd love to hear from my audience. And as per usual, if you would like to collaborate with me and produce a collaborative episode with me, or feature on my program or have me on your program, again, please contact me. I love to meet people, I love to hear different perspectives, and I love to learn along with other people. Until next time, take care.